You never really know who's getting into your car until the doors are locked, the engine's running, and there's no turning back. There's something about driving through the city at night that changes people. The streets become a stage for the bizarre and the unpredictable. As an Uber driver, I've seen things that would make your skin crawl. From silent passengers who vanished before drop-off to rides that ended with me questioning reality itself, these nights have blurred the line between coincidence and something much darker. I started driving to pay off debt. But the more I drove, the more I realized I wasn't just picking up passengers, I was collecting stories. Some were funny. Others were sad. But a few left me rattled to my core. One of them in particular still keeps me up at night. What do you do when a stranger knows more about you than they should? It started like any other Friday night. The air was thick with humidity and that weird electricity that seems to hang over the city when something's about to go wrong. I had already completed 3 rides, all of them uneventful. Just small talk and Spotify playlists humming in the background. I pulled into a gas station to grab a coffee, debating whether I should call it a night early. I remember thinking maybe just one more ride. I wish I hadn't. As soon as I hit go online, a request popped up. Pickup location 5 minutes away. The passenger's name was Lena. No profile picture. 5-star rating. Nothing out of the ordinary, really. I pulled into a quiet residential street lined with townhouses and old oak trees that cast long shadows across the pavement. She was already outside, standing under a streetlight. Dressed in all black, small backpack, looking down at her phone. Something about the way she stood made my stomach twist. It wasn't fear exactly. It was like a warning bell ringing quietly in the background of my mind. "Lena?" I asked as she slid into the back seat. She looked up and smiled. "Yeah, thanks for coming." Her voice was calm, polite, but flat, like she was trying to sound normal and missing the mark by a few inches. I started driving, watching her in the rearview mirror. She didn't say anything for the first few minutes. No music, just the hum of the tires and the occasional buzz from her phone. Then she said something that made me grip the steering wheel tighter. "You know, this route, it's the same one he used." I glanced in the mirror. "Sorry, what?" She smiled again. "The man who used to drive me home from my shift. Same pickup spot. Same drop-off. But he never made it to the end." A chill ran through me. He was also a rideshare driver? She didn't answer immediately. She just stared out the window, tracing the raindrops as they slid down the glass. "He was nice," she said softly. "Too nice." I didn't know what to say. Something about her tone made it clear this wasn't a casual memory. She wasn't reminiscing. She was warning. I wanted to ask more, but the streetlights suddenly blinked out as we passed under a row of trees, plunging the road into darkness. My headlights cut through it just enough for me to see the road ahead. I felt a creeping tension in my chest. How did he not make it to the end? I asked. She leaned forward, her breath cold against my ear despite the summer heat. "He took a shortcut." I nearly swerved. She leaned back again, crossing her legs like we were in a coffee shop chat, not in a moving vehicle through an unlit neighborhood. I looked at the GPS. The route had changed. At some point, it rerouted down a narrow, unfamiliar road I definitely hadn't approved. I tapped the screen. "That's weird. Did you change the destination?" She didn't answer. I pulled over. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I just want to make sure we're going the right way." She looked up, her face blank. "You already are." That was the moment I felt it. The shift. Like the whole night had tilted slightly sideways. I wasn't sure if I was being messed with or if I'd stumbled into something I wasn't meant to witness. I turned back to the screen, manually rerouted us back to the main road and kept driving. The tension didn't leave my chest for the rest of the ride. When we finally got to her destination, she opened the door and paused. "You're smarter than he was," she said. "He followed the shortcut." Then she got out and disappeared into the shadows of an apartment complex that didn't even have a working light over the front door. I sat there, engine running, heart thudding. That night, I dreamed of a dark road with no exit. Of headlights that only lit up trees that looked too tall. Too still. I thought that would be the end of it. Just a weird ride. But a few nights later, I got another ping. Same pickup street. Different name. I almost declined it. Almost. But I didn't. This time, it was a man. Mid-30s. Baseball cap? Hoodie. He looked nervous when he got in. "You all right?" I asked, trying to keep it light. He hesitated. I almost canceled. "Why?" "Because the last time I took an Uber from here, the guy never finished the ride." My skin prickled. "What do you mean?" "He vanished. It was in the news a couple years ago." "You didn't hear about it?" I shook my head slowly. He stared out the window. "It was weird. He picked up a girl right around the spot. Drove off the main route. Police found the car weeks later, no sign of him. Like he evaporated. My hands gripped the wheel so tight they ached. He turned to look at me, then smiled awkwardly. But hey, you look like you've got better judgment. I didn't smile back. That ride was quiet. Too quiet. Every time the GPS offered a new shortcut, I refused it. I stuck to the main roads, ignored the eerie silence between us, and drove straight to the drop-off point without a word. When he got out, he gave me a generous tip. I never drove that neighborhood again. But not all scary experiences are subtle. Some come at you loud and fast. Like the guy who tried to open the back door before I even stopped the car, his eyes darting around like he was running from something. Or the woman who wouldn't stop whispering names I didn't recognize over and over like a chant. One night, I picked up a teenager around 2 a.m. She said her friends dared her to go home alone. She laughed about it like it was a joke. But the moment we got moving, she started crying. Not sobbing. Not loud. Just silent tears running down her cheeks. I asked if she was okay. She nodded. I asked if she wanted to go somewhere else. She said no. But she didn't stop crying until we pulled into her driveway. I'm sorry, she said as she got out. I don't usually cry. But I saw something tonight I can't forget. Then she ran inside. The camera in my dash had recorded the entire ride. When I got home, I watched it. At first, everything looked normal. But as I slowed it down, I noticed something. For a few frames just before we pulled into her driveway, there was a figure in the rear window reflection. But there was no one else in the car. I paused it, rewound, played it again. Still there. I stopped watching after that. You'd think all of this would make me quit. It didn't. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. That late nights and too much caffeine were warping my brain. But deep down, I knew something was happening. Something real. Something no one talks about. Uber drivers operate in the cracks of society. In the between hours. We're the ones who see the city when it's not trying to impress anyone. When the mask comes off, we drive the people who have nowhere else to go. Who are running from something. Or towards something worse. And sometimes the danger isn't who's in the back seat. Sometimes it's the road itself. There's a stretch of highway just outside the city that I started avoiding after a string of strange pickups. It's not particularly remote, but it has this uneasy stillness after dark. There aren't many lights, and the trees on either side seem to close in like the road is slowly being swallowed. I used to think that was poetic. Now I just think it's a warning. My first unsettling trip down that road was during a storm. The rain was coming down so hard I could barely see. Most drivers would have logged off, but surge pricing had kicked in and I needed the money. So I took a ride request from someone named Rafik. The pin dropped right in the middle of that forested road, but I figured maybe his GPS was off. It happens all the time. I texted, just confirming your location. Are you near the gas station? No reply. I pulled over where the pin landed. The road was empty. No houses. No signs. Just forest on both sides and rain slamming the windshield. I kept my doors locked, hazards blinking, wipers barely keeping up. Then I saw him. A man walked out of the woods. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't soaked, even though he should have been. He walked right up to the passenger side and tapped the window. I cracked it just a bit. Rafik? He nodded but didn't say anything. Something in me said, don't unlock the door. So I didn't. I asked him where he was going. Back, he said. Back where? He pointed down the road, the opposite direction from where my GPS said to go. He didn't look angry. Didn't raise his voice. But the air changed. I felt the pressure in my ears like the cabin had lost altitude. I told him I couldn't take the ride. That he'd need to cancel. He didn't move. Just stared at me. Then he smiled. I floored it. The tires screeched on the wet asphalt as I peeled away, heart pounding so hard it made my vision blur. I didn't stop driving until I hit a well-lit intersection 15 minutes away. I checked the app, no record of a rider named Rafik. No fare. No canceled ride. It was as if that whole pickup never existed. I should have taken a break after that. But I was in too deep. I told myself I was just tired. That it was some kind of glitch. Maybe he'd typed the wrong pickup address. Maybe he was just a weird guy trying to get home. But the next night, I got a ride request from the exact same location. Different name this time. Maya. I didn't go. I started wondering how many drivers did accept. And how many never got back online. It sounds dramatic. It sounds like I'm making it up. But every Uber driver I've gotten close to, every one that works the night shift, the late hours, the forgotten corners of the city, they all have stories like mine. And they don't share them in public. They mention them in passing with a nervous laugh or a change of subject. Like if you talk about it too long, something starts listening. I met a guy at a rest stop once. He'd been driving for over a decade. Had that worn out but watchful look that veterans of any job eventually get. He told me about a ride he gave to a woman with no shoes wearing a hospital gown under her jacket. He asked her if she was okay. She said she had just been discharged. But when he tried to confirm the address she gave, it didn't show up on the map. It wasn't even a valid street. He offered to drive her to a nearby hospital instead. She didn't respond, just kept mumbling something under her breath. When he dropped her off at the hospital entrance, he turned around and she was gone. The seat was dry. She hadn't been wet from the rain. She hadn't left a trace. His camera didn't catch her either. It recorded the drive, the road, the dashboard, but the back seat was empty the entire time. He quit driving a few weeks after that. Said he couldn't trust his eyes anymore. That hit me harder than I expected. Because the truth is, once you start questioning what's real, the road stops being a straight line. It becomes something else. I once picked up a man who asked if he could sit in the front seat. That's usually a red flag. But he looked harmless. Mid-40s. Glasses. Soft voice. He asked if I believed in curses. I laughed it off, tried to keep the conversation light, but he wasn't joking. He said he used to drive for Uber too. Until he picked up the wrong person. A woman in white, he said. Didn't speak the whole ride. She just hummed. A single note. Over and over. I asked what happened. She left something behind, he said. What was it? He didn't answer. He just looked at me and said, "You'll know if it happens to you." That night, I checked my car 3 times after my last ride. I don't know what I was expecting to find, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind. These kinds of experiences don't happen every night. Most of the time, it's just people going from bars to homes, restaurants to airports. Normal lives passing through my back seat. But every once in a while, something else gets in, and it doesn't want to go anywhere. One night, I got a ride request from a girl named Jenny. She sounded panicked on the phone, begged me not to cancel, said she didn't feel safe where she was. The pickup was near the edge of the industrial district, where old factories and half-finished condos sit abandoned like skeletons. When I pulled up, she sprinted to the car and jumped in. "Drive," she said. "Anywhere." She was shaking, hair wet, clothes torn like she'd been running through brush. I started driving, watching her in the mirror. "Are you hurt?" I asked. She shook her head, but didn't speak. I tried to get her to explain, but she kept glancing out the window like she expected someone to be following. After 10 minutes, she asked me to drop her at a diner. I offered to wait to make sure she was okay, but she refused. I watched her walk inside. Then, an hour later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Thank you." That would have been the end of it, except for one thing. When I checked the app the next morning, there was no record of a rider named Jenny. No trip logged. Nothing in my history. The timestamp showed that my car had been idle for 45 minutes. Like the system had been paused. I started documenting everything after that. Every ride. Every face. Every address. Just in case. Because something told me that this wasn't just a few glitches or coincidences. It was a pattern. A secret side of the job that no one talks about. Where the rules don't apply. Where the road bends, time skips, and people disappear. And I wasn't the only one who'd noticed. There's a message board for night drivers. Not official. Just a place we share warnings. Bad passengers. Dangerous intersections. But every now and then someone posts something that doesn't belong. Like the story of a driver who picked up a woman who refused to be seen in the mirrors. Or the guy who found a tooth under his seat with no memory of any passenger who might have lost it. Some of us try to explain it. Stress. Lack of sleep. Hallucinations. But the truth? We don't know. We just keep driving. Because stopping feels worse. Because the minute you let yourself believe it's real, that's when it gets closer. That's when the car stops being yours. I thought maybe I was cursed. I changed cars, changed cities, even changed apps for a while. I drove for a local service with fewer users, thinking maybe the smaller pool would keep the strange ones out. It didn't. One night in the new city, I picked up a couple from a quiet neighborhood. They were older, maybe in their 50s. Very well dressed. The woman wore a long green scarf that she kept fidgeting with, wrapping and unwrapping it around her fingers like a nervous tick. They asked to be taken to a church about 20 minutes away. I confirmed the location and started driving. For the first 10 minutes, they didn't say a word. Then the man leaned forward and asked if I could turn off the headlights. I thought I misheard him. "I'm sorry." He repeated it. "Turn off the headlights. Just for a moment." I laughed awkwardly. "Sir, I can't drive in the dark." But he didn't laugh. Neither did she. They just stared at me through the rearview mirror. Something about the way they looked didn't feel like a joke or a prank. It felt like pressure. Like an unspoken threat. I slowed the car, flipped the hazards on, and pulled to the side. "I think you should find another driver," I said. They didn't argue. They simply got out, silent, and started walking down the street, away from the destination they had entered. As they disappeared into the shadows, the woman turned around once. She waved. Then they were gone. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and stayed offline for a week. That's the thing nobody tells you about being a driver. You're not just taking people from place to place. You're stepping into their lives, their energy, their trauma. Sometimes it sticks to you like a film. Sometimes you bring it home. I started having dreams. The same dream over and over. I'm in the driver's seat, but the car won't stop. The gas pedal is stuck. The road keeps changing. Sometimes it's city streets. Sometimes it's underwater. Sometimes I look in the mirror and there's someone sitting in the back seat, smiling. And it's always the same person. The woman in the green scarf. Even when I change cities again, change jobs, take a break, it keeps happening. It's like once you see the things behind the curtain, they don't let you forget. One night, I picked up a man who smelled of smoke and gasoline. I almost canceled when I saw him walking toward the car, but I felt guilty. He looked exhausted, worn down by something I couldn't see. The second he sat down, he asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I didn't answer. He didn't seem to care. He said he used to be a paramedic, that he'd seen more death than he could count. But one night, he was in the back of the ambulance with a teenager who didn't make it. They were on the highway, sirens off, taking the body back to the hospital. Then, out of nowhere, the lights in the ambulance cut out. The driver said the engine just died. They were stranded in the middle of a road with no other cars around. And then the door opened. The kid, who had been gone for over an hour, sat up. He looked around and asked where his mom was. The paramedic told me he quit the next day. Said he couldn't handle reality bending like that. Said the worst part was the kid smiled before he laid back down. I didn't know what to say. We drove the rest of the way in silence. When he got out, he turned to me and said, "You'll start to notice it more often." The cracks. I watched him walk away into the fog. That phrase stuck with me. The cracks. Because I'd seen them too. Moments when things didn't behave the way they should. Roads that led to dead ends that weren't there on the map. Riders whose reflections didn't match their bodies. Drop-off addresses that turned into empty fields. One time, I picked up a woman who asked me to take her to her childhood home. She was probably in her late 30s. She told me stories on the way, how she used to ride her bike down the hill, how her dad made pancakes every Sunday, how her mom always smelled like vanilla and coffee. I didn't think much of it until we pulled up. The house was abandoned. Windows shattered. Roof sagging. Overgrown weeds everywhere. She just stared at it. Then she said, "They haven't been here for a long time, have they?" "No," I said. "Looks like it's been years." She nodded, got out, and walked toward the house. I waited. I don't know why. Maybe I felt protective. Maybe I just didn't want to leave her alone. Then the porch light flicked on. She stepped inside. And the door closed behind her. I waited 10 minutes, then 20. Then I got out and walked up the steps. Knocked on the door. No answer. I called out. Nothing. I peered through the window. The house was empty. Just debris and dust. No signs of anyone. No working lights. I ran back to the car, locked the doors, and drove away. Fast. The app said the trip was complete. And the tip she left was one word. Thanks. People think driving for Uber is just about directions and ratings and 5-star service. But it's so much more. It's about gut feelings. About reading people. About knowing when something's wrong even if you can't explain why. It's about surviving. Because not all passengers want a ride. Some of them want a witness. Some of them want to be remembered. And some of them want to take you with them. A few months ago, I almost quit for good. Picked up a quiet, older man. He didn't say much until we were halfway through the ride. Then he asked, "What do you think happens when we die?" I didn't answer. He kept going. I think we get a choice. But only if we're listening. He turned and looked me in the eye through the rearview mirror. Are you listening? I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. He smiled. Good. Then he asked to be dropped off at a graveyard. When we arrived, he opened the door and paused. You've been a good driver, he said. You're careful. That's why they haven't gotten you yet. Then he left. That was it. But ever since then I keep hearing things. Small noises when the car is empty. Whispers when the engine is idling. The sound of someone clearing their throat in the back seat, even when there's no one there. I keep the windows cracked now. I sage the car once a week. I keep a small Quran in the glove box. A cross hanging from the mirror. A charm from my grandmother tucked under the seat. I don't know which belief system is right, but I figure why not cover all the bases? Because whatever's out there, it doesn't seem to care about rules. It doesn't care what you believe. It only cares that you see it. And once you do, you can't unsee it. The more you drive, the more the night begins to feel like a living thing. Like something watching you. Testing you. Not all at once, but in subtle ways. A wrong turn that wasn't there yesterday. A familiar face in an unfamiliar place. A trip that starts with a real person and ends with a question mark. There was one last ride that changed how I look at everything. I think about it every time I open the app. Every time I hit go online. Every time I ask myself if this will be the night I don't come back. It was late. Near 3 a.m. I was about to sign off when I got a request. It was close. Too close, honestly, just down the street from where I was parked. The name was simply unknown. No profile photo. No rating. It should have been a red flag. But I was too tired to think. I accepted. The pin dropped right in front of a closed bakery. I pulled up, headlights dim, engine humming low. No one was there. I waited 2 minutes. Then 3. Just as I reached to cancel the ride, the passenger door opened slowly. A woman got in. I didn't see where she came from. No footsteps. No shadow. Just the quiet creak of the door and the whisper of her sitting down. She wore a vintage-looking dress. Pale skin. Dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her voice was barely a whisper. Drive. I didn't ask where. I just drove. The GPS didn't light up. No route. No destination. The app didn't even show her as active. We drove through the city. Past the warehouses, over the bridges, through alleys where the streetlights flickered like dying fireflies. I glanced at her through the mirror. She was staring out the window, lips moving like she was mouthing something silently. Then, all at once, she turned and looked straight into my eyes. You've seen them, haven't you? My breath caught. She smiled, but it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. They're always watching. Waiting for a driver who keeps going. Most people turn around. But you don't. I swallowed hard. Who are they? She looked out the window again. The ones between. The ones who never made it to their destination. So now they ride? Forever. I realized then that the streets were empty. Too empty. No traffic. No people. Just the soft buzz of the dashboard and the sound of her voice. When did you start seeing the cracks? She asked. I couldn't speak. You're already marked, she continued. But you knew that. You felt it. In your dreams. In the silence between rides. She leaned forward slowly. Whatever you do, she whispered, don't take the bridge. What bridge? I asked, my voice barely audible. Then she vanished. I swear to you, vanished. Not stepped out. Not faded. Gone. The car was moving. Doors locked. No sign of her opening anything. Just me and the echo of what she'd said. I looked down. The app was closed. My phone was off. I hadn't even noticed. I pulled over and sat there for a long time. Just breathing. Trying to figure out if I was awake. Trying to figure out if I was still me. That was the night I realized something. It's not just haunted passengers. It's not just cursed roads or ghostly pickups. It's the job. It's the act of driving people from one life to another. From one version of themselves to something else. The car becomes a vessel. A ritual. A liminal space. And when you do it long enough, that space starts speaking back. It learns your name. It remembers your face. So why do I keep driving? Because, somehow, I feel like I'm protecting people. Like by absorbing these rides, these strange encounters, I'm keeping them away from someone else. Like this is my penance. Or maybe my purpose. So if you're ever out late and your Uber driver seems tense or asks too many questions or keeps checking the mirrors, don't be alarmed. They might not be paranoid. They might just be trying to figure out whether you were one of them. Or whether something else snuck in behind you. And if you're a driver like me, here's my advice. Keep your doors locked. Trust your instincts. Never take the bridge. And whatever you do, Don't look in the mirror for too long, because sometimes what looks back isn't you.